Kia ora everyone, I hope everything's going well with you. Just another quick message from me again this week, partly to talk about your discussion, your online activity last week, and also to talk about the things that are coming up. Firstly, I would just like to point out that I have put up some tips and pointers for the first assignment, which I know is, seems a little bit like, oh, how did we get to that already? But end of March, your first assignment for this paper is due in, so please make sure that you pay attention to those and use it to start thinking about the kinds of things you need to be including in that assignment. And also I would suggest starting to source some literature yourselves, because as you will be aware at this level of study, you need to be reading more widely than just the materials that the course provides you with, and you need to be independently sourcing your own literature. So firstly, it's been really interesting for me reading the feedback about the planning cycle that I put up for you all, and I'm not at all surprised how few of you have said you've seen something like that when you've been out on practicum in early childhood settings. In the past, I think we were very explicit about the planning cycle, and over time this has kind of waned, and many teachers will be going through this kind of planning cycle without explicitly stating that, and that's okay as long as all of those aspects are being covered. But I also think that there is a large number of teachers who are perhaps not fully aware of how important it is to go through each of those steps of the planning cycle, and that just writing an anecdotal observation or a learning story on its own doesn't make it planning, and that there are in fact some very key necessary steps to make sure that it is in fact planning. So I think that it would be very useful for all of you to make sure you keep a copy, whether you download it to your computer or print it off, of that planning cycle, because it will definitely help you in the future. Feel free to change wording, scribble on it, make it meaningful for you, as long as you get those key bits about all of the steps that are necessary within that planning cycle. So this week in our class we're focusing on narrative assessment. It kind of feels like we've been building up to that for a number of weeks. You'll see in those class notes there that I make the point really clearly that narrative assessment itself is not something new. It's a research tool or assessment tool that's been around for a really long time. What is new are learning stories. So learning stories are just one form of assessment that Margaret Carr and colleagues develops themselves, that sits alongside of or is part of narrative assessment, and learning stories are specifically developed for our context here in New Zealand and to align with Te Whāriki. So I think it's important that you get that clear in your understanding that there are other types of narrative assessment like diaries or journaling, you know, all those kinds of things as well, but learning stories are just one form of. Also in there I've got some links to things that to sites that I think would be really useful for you to have a look at. Narrative assessment has been particularly promoted at Ministry of Education level as an appropriate assessment tool for using with children with additional learning needs. And as I say in the notes, one of my very good colleagues said to me, well, if it's the best assessment tool for children with additional learning needs, then it must be the best assessment tool for all children, because those children with additional needs are those children who we know we need to pay the most attention to. So those links are in there, so please do take the time to have a look at those. I've also put in a PDF for you to have a look at some learning stories written by the teachers at West End Kindergarten here in Palmerston North. I do explain that fully in the notes about why I've included those in there and what they demonstrate. It's a beautiful resource that I've taken these stories from, so these are just part of a much bigger resource in which it explores a child who decided to call herself Silky. That's the pseudonym she'd chosen for herself. But what I'd really like you to pay attention to within these stories is the really strong evidence that's written down in the stories about teachers planning, their intentional teaching, their intentional responses to Silky in order to extend, broaden, deepen her learning and through her very strong interests. So do have a look at those. They provide a wonderful example for you. Also this week there's a a reading that I love including, and I love looking at students' responses to this reading. It's by a man called Ken Blakelock. Some of you may have heard of him, some of you might not. Ken Blakelock is a really, really important man, I would say, or important person, in that he is starting to ask questions about learning stories and their purpose, and whether their intent is actually what's happening in practice and settings. So he provides some critique around learning stories, and that's something that we actually haven't had a lot of. No method of assessment or planning or evaluation is perfect. But so he's just asking some questions around learning stories as an assessment tool and their effectiveness. So I'm sure you'll get a lot out of that reading. And it is important that we critique. We don't just accept something just because other people tell us that it's great. That actually we need to be critical about, and that doesn't mean negative, but to be critical about what we're reading, what we're doing, and how we engage in our practice. So there's just one reading there by Ken Blakelock, but he has actually written a number of articles, all for the most part published here in New Zealand in journals. So I would recommend that you search some of those out, as I think they will provide some really useful information for your first assignment. Anyway, that's enough from me. I hope you all have a wonderful week. I am on my block course for my ED Monday and Tuesday of this week, but I will be checking emails as and when I can, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. So please do keep in touch if there's anything I can do to help you. Have a fabulous week. See ya.